We're expecting something a bit weird, something a bit wonderful. He tends to play all sorts of openings, Artemiev. He has ideas behind every specific opening, but it's very rarely a main line. It's very rarely something super direct where the opponent just has to solve 2 or 3 problems to be okay. So Magnus, I think, won't have even prepared too much from the black side against Artemiev, because Artemiev can open with his king's pawn, queen's pawn, any move under the sun. He does open with 1d4. And we see black's knight come out. I prepared for Artemiev recently at the European Team Championships, and I just gave up after a while because he plays every opening under the sun. And Simon, are we going to see Harry the H-pawn push forward here?
That's it.
Already?
Yeah.
That would be the chessable course you've just made.
Big mistake there.
So he doesn't go for it.
Into the Grunfeld.
Yeah. The Grunfeld defense. So a counter-attacking opening by Magnus, often giving white extra central pawns, but black will aim to challenge those central pawns from the sides.
One of your specialities. This is the first opening I think you played, wasn't it? And you still play it nowadays as black, and played by a lot of dynamic players. Garry Kasparov played this a lot, and
Peter Svidler, big expert.
Yeah, MVL, of course. So it's a counter-attacking opening for black, yeah.
Do you think it's a good choice, though, to kind of play something that's quite dynamic and could potentially be quite forcing?
I think against Artemiev specifically, it's a very, very good choice. That being said, he does play himself as black, so, I mean, Artemiev, he just doesn't like his opponents to be direct in the opening. And the Grunfeld is one of the most direct lines with lots of forcing variations. So I think against Artemiev specifically, maybe Magnus has picked this line, and white's bishop coming out there. It's maybe not the main move. Usually we see a trade of pawns in the centre, but white's bishop coming out. Now black's usual move is to plant the knight in the centre of the board.
It's quite funny, Dave, because I was looking at this position recently for my last chessball course I did with Richard Palliser, and you can get the same position, but the pawns on h4 and h5. And then bishop g5 is actually a much stronger move, because your pawn on h4 protects the bishop. So this knight jump doesn't work as effectively. In this one, though, black often gives up a pawn to get that bishop and get very active chances. And as you say, I think it's a good choice against Artemiev, who's someone who likes it quite calm, I feel. He likes a nice, slow approach to the game. So Magnus changing his style because of that reason.
Yeah, and Artemiev playing a line that's very well known, but it is known to drift towards a level type of endgame. So Artemiev, as you mentioned, Simon, liking things quieter, at least at the start of the game. He likes to build up and survive the opening before putting the pressure on as the game draws on. So white's bishop stepping back. Now I'm expecting to see a knight trade from Magnus Carlsen. White's bishop has lost a bit of time, but now there is pressure on black's central pawn, so you need to trade a set of knights in order to relieve that tension.
Yeah, if he does trade knights, it's the main move. It's not the only move, but it's something that would be consistent with what Magnus Carlsen played in 2012 against Hikaru Nakamura. So after the trade of pawns, and then I'm expecting black to support the pawn in the middle of the board and just pick up his c-pawn and move it 1 square.
Oh, really?
That's the main line. Oh, no.
It's definitely not the main line.
No, it's not the main line. It's what Magnus did in 2012.
OK, so the main line is black's c-pawn pushing forward 2 squares. So, yeah, maybe Magnus in 2012, years ago, less familiar with the Grunfeld in those days. Maybe he was just trying to take his opponent out of theoretical waters. I would expect him to be a bit more direct here.
How strong is Magnus's memory? Because at this level, memory is an important part of being a good player. You have to memorize all that theory that you've learned over the years of playing chess, and if you can't recall what you've worked on 5 years ago, you can get a bad position. He's played the main move, but he has, I think, quite famously, this incredible memory, Magnus. Right?
You've seen that video, Simon, that I did with Magnus last year on his memory. Go to Chess24, if not, and search Magnus Carlsen memory.
Yeah, the memory test.
The memory test.
Oh, incredible stuff.
Yeah.
Do you think, is that very unique, Magnus Carlsen, the memory test, or is there several players on this level that could show us same kind of things?
To be honest, I think all the players at the top level have a fantastic chess memory.
Yeah.
I mean, we even see it with David here in the studio. You see how he's like, oh, I worked on this, and then this is the main move.
Oh, I played this in 2001. I remember. Yeah.
Right. And he doesn't. And I have the database in front of me, and he's like, yes, that was this, and I'm yes. But my memory recall is not great. Is yours great?
It's pretty okay, actually.
It's okay
I think for long-term memory, at least. So. Yeah, I mean, there's a famous story of Magnus Carlsen doing the Reykjavik pub chess quiz, which I might have recalled before, but it's a famous quiz they play at the Reykjavik tournament, still theory on the board here, where it's chess-related questions, but not about your own game. They're extremely hard questions, and you have all these historians turn up for this quiz, and it's really, really hard, and Magnus won it pretty much on his own with the highest score ever. And some of the questions he's been asked were so obscure. They're positions from 300 years ago between two players, which no one had heard of. And he could name the players, name the position. So his history and understanding and the work he's put in and his recall is incredible. And, you know, it shows in the way he plays.
Fantastic.
I think he formed a team with Jon Ludvig Hammer, and they called it MC Hammer. And they did very well, as Simon mentioned. Meanwhile,
can't touch this.
Meanwhile, some trades on the board. This is still mainline theory, as Simon mentions. This is still very well-known territory. I've had this position countless times myself from the black side. So 2 main moves as black. White has a strong hold in the center, and you want to challenge that. So either you bring the black knight out, or you give this check. And this check normally requires white to block it with a queen. We see a queen trade, and the white king in the center. So this white king, it looks pretty strong because the queens are off and it's already centralized. It's ready to join the action later on, but the black rooks will centralize and hit that white king at some point. So pros and cons behind having white's king in the middle of the board. I always slightly prefer white's position in these lines just because the center is so strong. If you look at white's 2 central pawns, they protect each other. They're so hard to break down. Even if you break them down, it just leads to exchanges. And now I expect to see white's king maybe take a step back. There we go, off the line of the black rook. And very balanced endgame in general. It's just down to who knows these positions better maybe and who can come up with more creative ideas in this endgame.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of clever the way, Artemiev has played this, because he's facing a very double-edged opening, but he's managed to get a position which he likes playing. He likes playing these kind of positions, get the queens off, play a more slower approach to the game. And it's very important, I feel, when you have the white pieces especially, to take the game into the kind of position you want to play. Not even if you're getting an advantage all the time, but just a position you enjoy playing and you're very good at playing. Don't go tactical if you're not very good at calculating, for example. And here, a very normal pawn push, you're trying to undermine black's 2 pawns with your 1 pawn. It's called a minority attack, this idea. And it's a little bit more comfortable and easier to play for white, as you say, David, I would feel here.
Yeah, I think it's just there's more margin for error as white. Even if things go really wrong and black is able to push a pawn in the center, explode things open, that will just make the game fizzle out most likely. And as black, if you're a bit passive, if you don't do too much, then white does have ideas, as Simon mentioned, this minority attack. Maybe white can start pushing forward on the other side of the board as well with some pawns. It's less clear what black should be doing. Meanwhile, Magnus stops any potential pawn push to further open up those white rooks by planting his knight on the side of the board. And usually we say knights on the rim are dim, but this is very typical for the Grunfeld defense. That black knight is actually technically on an outpost, supported by a pawn as well, so on a decent square.
And it's also preventing white from marching the A pawn up 1 square just to initiate Simon's plan of attack. And this is why there's only 1 game in my database between 2 grandmasters, Melkuman and Chaparinov. And in that game, white actually rerouted the knight and put it on D2 in order to initiate a trade.
So black's knight just doing a great job of blocking up this whole left side of the board. So the move Jovanka mentioned that has been played before is this knight retreat, going to this square or this one to get rid of this knight. And that trade, I guess it benefits white slightly, but then again, material coming off the board does mean a draw is the most likely result. And what happened in that game, Jovanka?
Draw.
It was a draw, okay. So other plans for white could include just having studied similar positions to this one, not this exact position, similar plans could include just maybe gaining space on this king side, on the right side of the board. For example, you could try and challenge now for the open file that once black's knight has abandoned it. I'm trying to think what else you could possibly do as white. I would be inclined, if you want the knight trade, to go to a more central square like this one. Okay, he does go for the move that has been played before, a knight retreat. So will this knight trade favour white? That is the big question. Black's bishop on a long diagonal. Actually, both of black's bishops are on long diagonals right now, but they will be blocked by pawns, most likely. And this pawn is attacked by black's bishop from afar. Are we going to lift it up the board?
Yeah, in the game, White got very, very ambitious and lifted it up 2 squares.
Yeah, and we've mentioned him a couple of times already since you've arrived, Simon, but Keith Arkle, a friend of ours, grandmaster and endgame expert, loves this type of pawn push. I think he said it's his favourite move.
Favourite move. He said if you can ever play this move as black, so if you can ever play the same move that White's played here, then black's always doing OK, because it's kind of a luxury to be able to play such a move in a position. It means you have time. It means you can just gain some space, and space is very important in chess because you want to cramp your opponent's position, and that seems like a very sensible move to play. Yeah, and he has played it.
He has played it, and especially I've noticed when you're playing against this pawn structure, it's especially effective because now it's far less attractive for black to ever push this pawn 2 squares or push this pawn 2 squares because things would open up in White's favour. And yeah, it just clamps down, and later on you might push this pawn forward, and then you're very flexible. You could clamp down even further with this pawn, or you can open up lines with Harry, the h-pawn here. It's just a very nice pawn structure for White. On the other side of the board, black has the advantage with this 2 versus 1, but that's very much a long-term thing. That's only going to come into effect later in the game. Short-term, White's pawns are maybe more mobile. And in the meantime, Magnus, I'm pretty sure he's going to bring his rook to the open file. I would just play that without thinking, to be honest. I don't see what else.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened in the game I have in my database. And White actually challenged the rook because, of course, you can't just allow black to have this amazing rook controlling the open line. And from here, White played actually quite a crafty move and tried to take control of the C line by actually posting his bishop onto the C7 square.
OK, so it's black's move first. What did black play, Ivanka?
Oh, sorry, I missed a move. He played a pawn move, which is F6.
Mm-hmm. It's nearly E5 as a tactic. It's the kind of move you have to watch out for, with some idea at some point of getting the open line and a tactic against the knight. It doesn't quite work here, but you've got to watch out for pawn breaks. And OK, Magnus preparing that pawn break, and we're still following the game, which is a little bit remarkable, actually. I wonder do you think they're aware of this game, or they're just playing the standard kind of moves you would do in such a position?
I have a feeling that they might not be aware of the game. It's just standard moves.
Normal moves, yeah.
This is all, I mean, this opening often leads to these types of positions. And, OK, we do see the first novelty of the game. So finally branching away from that previous example between 2 grandmasters that Ivanka mentioned, instead of bringing the bishop forward, which is a very typical idea, actually, in this opening, just dislodging the black rook and trying to at least block this open line, White has instead pushed a pawn. And he's trying to undermine black's structure here. It makes some sense because this is the side White is stronger. White has a pawn advantage. These 4 are less impressive than White's pawns. But then again, I don't know, it does feel a bit loose somehow. And some calculation needs to be done, for example, whether black can break forward in the center. What do we think, guys? Do we like this move?
I mean, if E5 doesn't work, this break that black is trying to play, then I think it's a great move because you're just trying to stop black's counterplay, and you want to maybe just simply capture black's pawn, rule out this break forever. So I guess E5, you have to play it now if you're going to get active. I mean,
the critical move.
So if E5 works for black, maybe it's not a good move, but if it doesn't work, great move, I'd say, here. So yeah, I mean, I guess White just wants to play pawn takes pawn, and then has a great pass pawn on the D file if black recaptures that one.
Just for example, yeah, if we see a trade of pawns, then this guy is rock solid, but also later going to march down the board unrivaled. So key moment for Magnus. Is he going to push this pawn forward? It's either very good or very bad, but now is potentially the moment.
He's gone back.
He goes back. Wow, surprising. I don't like that one. He's just hoping for a trade now, and then he's hoping to bring his bishop this way to maybe pin in the knight and go towards the white king. But it's very slow, and it is reliant on White being a bit submissive here and just saying, OK, I'll do what you want. Pawn takes pawn.
I mean, another very tempting idea for White here would to be able to use the light square bishop, because I just want to stop this one break black has, take the counterplay out. So if I brought that bishop to attack the rook, I'm trying to, I'm probably forcing you now to move that pawn. You've just moved 1 square forwards, and I rule out your main break in the position because I have total control. Simply come back, and I think I've gained quite a lot from this, as in my position now is nice and solid. You don't have any pawn breaks, and yeah, I can keep playing and playing and playing here.
Yeah. I guess Magnus here would be forced to push this pawn forward. At least he activates this bishop on a different diagonal. And I agree. I slightly prefer white, and I think this has profited white, this whole transition. But then again, black is still solid for now, and it is hard for white to push these pawns forward. They'll always get taken off the board. So a tense position, and let's go back to the players.
Is it going to be interesting now to see if Artemiev will sort of join Magnus's plan and trade off these pawns, or if it's going to maybe go for the win? Is another move going for the win?
I think he wants to go for the win in general, whether he takes that pawn or not.
Okay.
I wouldn't take that pawn just because my mindset in every chess game is if I know what my opponent wants, I'll do the opposite.
Yeah.
I'll try and frustrate them at every opportunity. And I doubt we'll see white take that black pawn off the board. It just feels like it's giving Magnus what he wants. But yeah, it's just about whether he finds an effective move. Maybe he'll go for similar plans to the one Simon mentioned there, or maybe he'll just maintain the status quo by, I don't know, pushing a pawn on the side of the board, pushing Harry up the board. It all depends on whether black's pawn break, the one we highlighted, is effective or not. And possibly it is a threat. And in that case, Artemiev needs to do something about it.
I mean, you could play a tactical idea here as well with bishop to b5, going the other way. And I want to play an idea that Jovanka mentioned was played in this Grandmaster game of trying to trap the black rook with just using the bishop pair. Bishop pair is incredibly powerful and open structures, and this at least creates what I think is a threat, which asks your opponent a question. So that's what he's thinking about now.
I quite like that move, actually, because, you know, if black reacts, say, for instance, by attacking that light square bishop, after all, the bishop is on black's side of the board. We know. We always say give
it a kick.
Exactly.
Give it a boot.
Exactly, but, you know, those pawn moves have consequences once the bishop just returns, even maybe back to its original square. And now the idea of actually playing the bishop to attack the rook, it's going to be really it's going to be really, really dangerous.
Yeah, it looks like a nice idea.
I mean, we're neglecting black's plans, though, and black does have one idea in the current position, and that is this pawn push. And it all depends, for example, if the white bishop moves, whether, say, we trade off first, whether this move is effective or not. It looks like a pawn sacrifice, but if the pawn is captured, suddenly there's stuff to work out. This is a very scary pin.
Yeah.
And not just that, but if the knight is defended, then the black knight can jump in, trying to overwhelm this knight.
There's a check.
Yeah, there is a check. So maybe it's just not a threat at the moment. Maybe it is. Who knows? But I mean, even this check. I mean,
looks scary.
I'm not scared of this check, to be honest. Jovanka, I would just block. And it's very, very complicated here, and that's why the players are spending so much time on the clock.
Yeah.
So it could turn like on those kind of accurate moves.
And again, I think Artemiev is doing something very clever here that when you're playing, and this is maybe one of the mistakes Eric Hansen didn't quite do in his game. So if you in a game of chess, you generally only have about what the top players would say 4 or 5 critical moments. And they're the moments where you have to use your time. If you have an obvious move, then there's no point thinking for ages. You play a move. But in this position, we're seeing it's very complex in the position. The result could all turn on this moment of the game. So you spend the time you have, use that time, and work out these critical moments as best you can. So I think he's doing time, using his time very, very wisely here.
Yeah, and that's one thing we haven't said actually that much of Artemiev throughout the Champions Chess Tour, using his time wisely. But he was 4 minutes up on the clock compared to Magnus, and now he's invested around 4 minutes. So time is roughly level now. And yeah, as you mentioned, Simon, it is a critical moment. So now is the moment to spend that time. I'm expecting him to speed up over the next few moves once he does stumble across a plan he likes.
And if you at home have any move suggestions, any chess questions you'd like to ask us, then remember to tweet us using the hashtag #ChessChamps. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, he does jump in. So one of the ideas we mentioned. And black's rook is under attack. Now the c-file is plugged, it's blocked. This bishop will most likely get kicked away, though, and will have to retreat.
Yeah, I think you can't move the rook to the side because it gets attacked by the bishop, so you have to create a threat here. And is Artemiev's idea, obviously he could go for a draw, but you can't do that in the match situation. But is his idea to bring the bishop back to a better square, slightly improving? So that's the only idea I can see, and just say, OK, I'm just trying to make some very slight improvements. But is the bishop really better after?
Yeah. Well, it could be, because it does mean when black makes the ideal pawn break, it doesn't attack the bishop.
So this is actually
free move.
This is very subtle. So we could show this, maybe, David, if the rook comes up one square, attacking the bishop, then white's idea could be to move the bishop all the way back, and let's now say Magnus moves the rook back again to try to keep control of the open file. Now maybe this bishop... Well, there's other options here because your break, David, this very clever break, doesn't have a tempo for black. It's incredibly subtle stuff, which you have to work out. But yeah, it's possibly a very clever idea.
Yeah, so just to explain, this pawn push doesn't hit the bishop anymore. So small difference, as you mentioned, it's these tiny little subtleties, nuances, and just having this bishop on a slightly better square or safer square than it previously stood on might make all the difference. Wow. I mean, in a rapid game, to see these tiny little details is incredibly impressive. And maybe it's effective, maybe it's not. But either way, kudos to Artemiev for at least going for this type of idea. Then again, let's hope that he tries to play for the win, because as mentioned, once Magnus does lift the rook up the board, he could just repeat moves by bringing the bishop back to this one. I have a feeling, though, that you guys are right. He's going to try and play on for the win.
Yeah.
And then the other one, game 2 between Esipenko and Nepomniachtchi, the bar has just completely shut off for Jan Nepomniachtchi. He still has 15 minutes left on the clock. Esipenko has 10 minutes left on the clock, but something must have happened in that game.
Yeah, it just does look like a one-move blunder by Esipenko, and he just underestimated his king safety, as he did in the first game today. And Nepomniachtchi, Simon mentioned, he's so tuned into his opponent's king, and he has found a really, really nice tactic. Maybe we'll get time to show that later, because Nepomniachtchi found a beautiful move. Meanwhile, this game has gone as predicted. It's not a repetition of moves. This is just the same position as earlier, but white's dark squared bishop is on a slightly safer square. So, yeah,
Clever
very
stuff.
sneaky.
And another critical point here. I mean, white, if he wants to win, has to now find a plan again. He's improved his position a little bit, but he still has to do something here. I expect it will be to do with the light square bishop, his other bishop. Where's he going to place that? That looks like the kind of obvious thing to try. I mean, there's other options. You could just slip the rook in the corner over one square, just play it very calmly, stop some of black's pieces potentially coming in. That looks like a sensible move as well. Maybe black can take your pawn, but it's something you could consider.
Yeah, that's a good question, actually, whether black is even threatening to take that white pawn. If you look at the g5 square, white's pawn there is hanging, but if black ever takes it, then black's pawn structure becomes very ugly. Black would lose a lot of central control, so that's unclear whether that's a threat. And Artemiev probably trying to work out whether that's the issue. But just from his body language, Artemiev leaning back a bit, I've seen that before. I've played him a few times over the board, and that normally means that he's not in love with his position. And if he's not in love with his position, he will feel a bit of temptation to repeat and bring his bishop back.
What's your score against Artemiev? I mean, he's incredibly strong, but
it's quite good, actually. I think I'm on +1. I think
quite good. That's a plus.
No.
How modest are you? I think quite good. I've just beat him. So how many times have you played him? One, I hope.
3.
3 times. Okay, that's
2 draws and 1 win.
That's very impressive. And Magnus, you have, because obviously
Magnus,
you're childhood friends with him, and your score against him?
-2. So 6 draws.
It's just -2.
6 draws and 2 losses, I think.
That's
also very impressive.
Nice. Oh, I need my revenge. I just want 1 win in a classical game against him, and then I'll retire happy.
As your friends, do you think, if you did beat him in a classical game, do you think he'd take that well?
I mean, he probably wouldn't talk to me for 7 years.
He still says that, so I guess he didn't play you, but when was that? 2003? Worst chess experience of my life is what he said.
Yeah, after my game against him in the final round.
Yeah.
The World Under-12 Championship in 2002. Yeah.
Well, you won then.
I drew only.
It wasn't.
He needed to beat me to get the gold medal.
Yeah.
And actually, he was better throughout the whole game, but I managed to defend an unpleasant endgame. So, but actually, our next 2 games after that, I had a big advantage. And one of the games I agreed to draw, I didn't realise I had a winning move. I just didn't see it. And I only had 30 seconds on my clock, so I took the draw. But I'll never forget that. Just 1 win against him would have been Imagine boasting about that for the rest of my life. Oh, missed opportunity.
Well, was he already back then? So we're talking 2003. The big name among young players in the world?
Actually, a few others. Nepomniachtchi was maybe regarded as the bigger talent. Nepomniachtchi won several gold medals in these youth events. Magnus never won a gold, actually, in any youth world or European event. So Nepomniachtchi won several golds. Another Russian player, Andreikin, won several golds. Back then, Vache Legrave was regarded as very good. Sergei Karyakin, he played a couple of times, but then he kind of bypassed all the youth events because he was already a grandmaster at 12.
That's true.
So, yeah, too many big names. And Magnus was one of the bunch, just like now we see a whole group of players like Esipenko, like Pragnananda, like Firouzja. And it's nice to see a whole generation come through, and it will be fascinating to see which one of the group emerges as the top dog, like Magnus did.
Yeah. And who gets into top 10 in the world. It's going to be interesting to see. Artemiev, 23, or has he turned 24 yet?
Good question.
Yeah, I'll check. But I think he is 23. Artemiev, same generation, born in the same year as young Christoph Duda. So those two have been fighting it out. And then we have Esipenko, who is only 19. And coming behind him, of course, we have Alireza Firouzja, and then you have Visenheimer and Abdusatorov, 17. I mean...
And they're all roughly the same age, right? 16, 17.
Yeah. Pragnananda, of course. Yeah.
And it somehow works like that in the chess world. You know, like 1990 was a golden year for future chess grandmasters. Yeah. And it seems to be the case with those who are 17, 16-year-olds because they're so strong.
Now it's 2003, 2004. There's a whole bunch, right? So, yeah, the new generation, they're rising, especially in this tournament. And meanwhile, a move from Artemiev. Do you like this one, Simon? White offering a trade of light squared bishops?
I do, actually. It's a very simple approach, and it kind of, I guess, suits Artemiev's style. That he wants simple advantages. He's really good at grinding. I mean, I would say his style and Magnus's style are quite similar in the way that they both prefer a small grind, a small advantage. Magnus is much more versatile, so you can play any position. So can Artemiev, but Magnus a better way. And this just aiming to swap off Black's bishop, which is crossing the board in a powerful way, and bringing the knight towards a good square. It's a logical move. It makes a lot of sense. So it can't be a bad move for sure. And at least he's trying to play for a win.
Yeah, I have to say, Simon, that I'm actually not a fan. Okay. And I'm not a fan for a concrete reason. I just think that after bishop takes bishop, and the knight is forced to capture that bishop. And then I'm just like, well, one of the key things about open lines is that if you control the bottom row, then you can kind of, in this particular case, it's the C1 square, you control the line. So I'm thinking the knight can just hop in.
So a double attack against the white rooks. You don't win anything because after rook takes rook, black has to recapture. But now, as I guess the idea is, yes, you might have to take a step back, but you've controlled this open line. And
that, for me, is a small delight.
Yeah,
small delights are the best, aren't they, in life sometimes? I mean, yeah, it's certainly a gain because you've gained the open file. I mean, I'm wondering here if white will now be able to bring his king towards the centre safely and, slowly improve. He's got such a great king now in these positions, the white king compared to the black king. And in the ending, the king is an incredibly powerful piece. So if I can just bring that king up another square and then, just start pushing my pawns forwards. My bishop is much better than the black bishop. Your knight is on the edge of the board. It seems like I prefer to be white, at least here still.
It's going to become we might be headed in that direction, but it's going to become very, very sharp. So I agree with everything you said there, Simon, but black does have counterplay. So, for example, the rook could come and target this weak pawn. There's actually no real way to defend it. I don't think you can really put your rook in the corner and walk into some knight checks, some calculation to be done here. Maybe it's possible, but it's a bit scary. So we might see a situation where white just abandons this pawn on the side of the board and, for example, marches the king up, starts pushing these pawns forward. And or maybe even white now takes control of the open line and tries to infiltrate into black's camp onto the 7th rank.
H6 is a
wow.
A move I would not consider.
Agreed.
I mean, this is is this a world champion move? I mean, I just wouldn't look at that side of the board. You know, I'd be blinkered by the moves that Jovanka has suggested.
I mean, this knight jump was so
it looks so
clear
obvious.
and obvious. Yeah. So I guess this pawn push, he just wants to eliminate as many pawns as possible on this side of the board. So, for example, if white steps up and guards this pawn, then maybe trading these things off. Magnus is thinking, okay, just slightly closer to safety, more pawns are leaving the board. But then again, it does look slow, right? And it's not even clear which pawn you capture.
Right, and one thing that I'm afraid of is, like, you know, if we just quickly in our minds do a comparison of the lines that Simon mentioned and you mentioned about the white king going active in the middle of the board, just imagine that situation and white has a pawn on h6. The black king can never, ever join the action. And I say that because white can play pawn takes pawn.
Which pawn are you thinking?
The h6 pawn.
Okay, and black will recapture, I guess?
Yeah.
And at least the black bishop now is just staring against granite, really. It's not going to break through on this diagonal. It'll have to reroute itself later on back where it came from, maybe. Surprising that white didn't go for that. I would be tempted to go the other way as well, just because I like having a passed pawn in the center of the board and now maybe bring the king up. But Artemiev chooses, indeed, to just support his pawns. We do go for this exact line we showed earlier, just with these pawn pushes included.
Yeah.
And in the other one, Jan Nepomniachtchi has now won game 2 with the black pieces against Esipenko. That means Nepomniachtchi is up by 1 point after 2 games. And the next one will start in about 14 minutes. Esipenko, he has now 2 rapid games, and he has to win at least one of them. And if he does, it's going to go to tie breaks. But Nepomniachtchi up by 1 point. Same as Magnus Carlsen, he won the first game. Do you see big chances for Esipenko in this game to make a comeback?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I think he's got... If you asked him before the game, and I always think this when you look at position, you ask the player, would you like this position before the game? And I think his answer would be yes. I take this position 99 times out of 100 against Magnus. I mean, I am a little bit worried about David's idea of black using that activity with the rook. But if I can somehow neutralise that one idea, then positionally speaking, white is just better. He's got better pieces, better centre, and you know, black's queenside pawns are on dark squares. You have a dark square bishop. There's some problems at the ending. So I think he would take this ending. Would you agree with that? I mean, but with this position before the game?
Yeah, I mean, maybe white doesn't have a huge advantage or anything, but stylistically, it's his type of position, right? Artemiev, okay, he brings his rook to the centre.
Very surprised by that, because why not at least push that knight to what seems to me a more passive square? I don't know, the knight on b3 it scares me a little bit. I'd rather put that on the side of the board before playing a move like this.
It also stops the white king getting forward, maybe. But just to kind of push the point, Artemiev in endgames, we've seen their aim chess stats are very similar, but endgames, he's one of the best players on the tour. So in general, he will trust himself in these types of positions.
And I have to say, when it comes to endgames and time trouble, he is fantastic. You know, he will calculate everything out incredibly quickly. And I have to say, I was a little bit impressed by his rook move. It looked odd, it didn't come to mind. But you know, it was kind of based on the fact that I think he had in his mind this idea of actually capturing the f6 pawn and maybe generating a very, very strong passed d pawn.
And that's why I guess Magnus has replied, not by being greedy, not by bringing the black rook in, but by using the black king. That black king wants to act as a blockader for this white pawn that has just pushed forward. Yeah,
I'm not convinced by this plan, because, I mean, let's say black centralises the knight now or something. I mean, I love pushing my opponent's pieces to bad squares. It just, I mean, what about this knight now coming? He has moved the knight back, so I don't know. I mean, that knight was certainly on a much worse square a while back.
Yeah, I mean, you could have that same position, but with black's knight on the edge of the board, right?
Yeah.
And maybe that was more effective. So, yeah.
You can't slip up against Magnus. This is the thing. Even if you get a position which is very playable, it's so hard because you make one. I don't know if it was a slight error, but one. He just grabs all the opportunities that are given to him, and I don't know. Is this okay now for black?
I mean, it felt like a position where white was very, very safe just a few turns ago. Now it feels like all 3 results are possible, right? Yeah. Because black is hitting this white pawn on the side of the board. The white A pawn is isolated, undefended. Black's knight can even go towards the centre, go towards the white bishop.
Centralising that piece.
Exactly. And white's lost a lot of control.
And unfortunately, the move that white really wants to play here is actually to move the rook to the c-line and perhaps pin the knight and the rook. But that is impossible because knight to d3 would be an unpleasant knight fork.
That's a big understatement. Unpleasant. That's a very English way of saying a disaster. Absolute disaster.
Yes.
A little bit unpleasant,
Yes.
Oh, it's raining today and it's actually pouring cats.
Yeah, that's correct. I'm very guilty of doing the British understatement.
Yeah, it's a very British thing, I think, isn't it? So.
Talking of slightly unpleasant, look at the clock time for Artemiev now.
Oh,
that is,
wow.
Yeah, earlier he was actually 4 or 5 minutes ahead on the clock compared to Magnus just after the opening stage. But now he's really spending too much time, and he's also made the position more complicated, as we mentioned. So now white's rook has lifted up the board. We always see these swinging rooks in the last few days of the knockouts, but white's rook is defending the white pawn on the side of the board. But look at this, black's bishop now going back to its original diagonal, indirectly attacking this white rook in the center. If black can push a pawn and open up that black bishop, black is doing great. So we see a pawn trade. Which way is Magnus going to capture, bishop or pawn?
It's tempting to capture with the bishop, but then I think pawn takes. Maintain the pawn integrity.
So white has a passed pawn now, the white d-pawn, and the Grunfeld is all about that pawn. I remember reading Jonathan Rowson's book on the Grunfeld when I was young, Understanding the Grunfeld, and he named that d-pawn Delroy, and it was all about whether it's a strength or weakness, and it's never clear. So either white has a very good, strong passed pawn in the middle of the board or a big target for black's pieces later.
Yeah, that's actually where I stole the idea for Harry from, really. It was Delroy, so it certainly wasn't my own idea.
You shouldn't mention that. You coined it.
No,
Copyright.
No.
Did he call it Harry?
No, he came up with naming the pawns after
Yes.
certain things in this great book on the Grunfeld, which was his main opening. And I mean, we spoke about this yesterday. This isolated pawn, and it is actually an isolated pawn as well, but it's also a pass pawn. So it's really like double-edged. Is it a game winner, or will it drop off the board? And maybe that's what the position will hinge around at the moment. That one pawn, but the time. Okay, Magnus having a good think here, but Artemiev's got to pick up the pace.
Yeah, and it feels like white already has to find some really tricky moves. I mean, that rook lift, white lifting the rook up the board, that wasn't obvious. It cost Artemiev some time. Now pushing his king up the board looks very healthy, but it's not going to be clear whether there might be some checks against that king later. That king's journey might not go much further. So there's a lot to think about for white, how to improve the white minor pieces, the knight, the bishop, which look okay, but actually can't jump anywhere effective. So lots of questions for Artemiev to answer. And now, okay, surprising, Magnus brings his knight back. But then again, it does block that pawn we've been talking about, white's far advanced d-pawn, and black's rook has suddenly opened up. So, yeah, personally, I quite like that, actually. Also, some threats of black pushing the f-pawn out of the way, opening up the black bishop to attack the white rook.
It's a nice move. Yeah, sorry,
So I was just going to say that I like it because of its surprise value. You know, Artemiev really doesn't have much time on the clock, and he would have been like, oh, how do I handle that?
Yeah. It also controls this other square in the middle of the board, the e5 square, which now white may have had a chance to move the knight into the centre, had Magnus not retreated. They say retreating knight moves are the hardest moves to see, right? Mm-hmm. And Magnus blundered earlier on in the tournament against Erik Hansen when he missed a retreating knight move. He could have done this. So, yeah, they're very hard to see. It's not natural to move your knights backwards.
Artemiev coolly playing his move with 8 seconds to spare.
He's a cool guy.
Well, he's used to these time troubles, right? We remember them definitely from last season.
He's not called the Iceman for nothing.
Yeah.
He's the Iceman.
But another unexpected move from Magnus Carlsen, not trading rooks immediately. He's saying, yes, the rooks can come off the board, but it's going to be on my terms. And black's rook attacking the white central pawn. Artemiev going down under 10 seconds again. He's just given up a pawn. What a move. He's just pushing a pawn forward. Now, if black's rook goes and takes this white central pawn that we've been talking about so much, white's rook will be able to get up to the 7th rank and start hitting some things. So
it's amazing seeing the body language between Artemiev and Esipienko, because if Esipienko is in this position, he'd be bouncing around, he'd be so active.
Shaking.
Artemiev is just, he just looks like he's going to fall asleep in a minute. He's got 20 seconds left now. Incredibly cool. But this seems like a pretty awesome move to play with so little time, because you have to give up a pawn, but you're trying to get your rook to a much more active square, I guess, is his plan, at least, if black takes the pawn in the middle of the board there.
And a big question for Magnus, do you take this white pawn now, but allow your opponent's pieces to get active? Because if you don't take it now, white is going to push another pawn in the center of the board and unite these two central pawns, white's e-pawn, d-pawn, they'll start marching. So Magnus shaking his head there. It's a huge decision. I don't think he's shaking his head because he's unhappy. I think it's just because it's a confusing situation and not one he expected. He was trying to kind of trick Artemiev. Now Artemiev's so low on time, but he's the one being tricked. And look at this. White's central pawn did indeed disappear, but that white rook on the 7th rank, very, very strong. And at the minimum, white can just go and recapture a pawn now. Take that a-pawn. I would do it immediately, actually.
Yeah, I think so. Just get rid of that pawn majority that black has. And, again, he has played that. It looks like, especially with Magnus's last move, swapping more pieces off, we might be heading towards a draw in this position. It looks very likely to me.
Especially if those two A-pawns drop off, if they get traded, which I think they quite likely will. White's going after this black pawn, black going after the white pawn. If it's just pawns on one side of the board, it's nearly definitely going to be a draw. And there we see the two knights, a bit of symmetry there. They do go and grab those pawns.
Yeah, and
no life left really now.
No, and I think you can see it in Magnus's face sometimes when he knows the game sort of drifted off into a draw, and it seems like a very fair result actually the way the game's gone.
Yeah, fair play to Artemiev. He tried something, it didn't really work out, maybe because he spent too much time on the clock and lost a bit of control. But also fair play to Magnus, who defended very well and just very calmly. A draw looks like a fair result. Actually, just a very high-quality game, right?
I think a very good game, both players. So.
Very accurate, I would say,
yeah.
From Magnus especially.
Yeah.
Some really nice moves.
Yeah.
That means he's going to be still up by 1 point, Magnus Carlsen, after 2 games. Artemiev, he has 2 more rapid games. To make that comeback, he needs a win to take it to tie breaks. And Magnus will have the white pieces in the next game.
Ooh, down to 3 seconds. Artemiev really keeping us on edge. And what's he doing? He's just given up a pawn.
Oh, wow.
Is this necessary?
He's showing off now.
It should still be a draw, but why go for this? Makes no sense giving up a pawn.
Are you seeing chances for Magnus now?
Yeah, definitely.
It's just, you don't need to give up a pawn like this. Why? Yeah, incredible.
I mean, it was just completely level.
This is kind of thing you're playing Magnus, and you're like, I'm just going to give myself some pain because, I don't understand that at all.
I'm pretty sure it's going to be a draw because if you look at black's corner pawn, so black has a 2 versus 1 advantage now with pawns, but if you look at black's H pawn and if you look at where it wants to promote, it promotes on a light square. So even if white, say the knights come off the board, even if white gives up his bishop and his pawn for black's remaining g-pawn, then white can just park the king in the corner on the light square. We saw this yesterday, actually, Nepomniachtchi, just parking your king on the in a corner square on the opposite colour to your opponent's bishop is enough to draw. So there is still some leeway. Despite what the computer says right now, Artemiev should still draw this game just by planting the white king in the corner of the board later on if he needs to.
But that's
why Magnus keeps the knights on the board.
How about the clock time? Is it hard for Artemiev to do that with so little time on the clock?
Well, now the knights are on the board, I think it's going to be a difficult task for him. He's more than capable of holding this position, but he has made a bit of a mountain out of a molehill in this defence.
Yeah, still a draw, but he would love to get the knights off. He would love to just park the white king near his pawn, and it should just be a fortress, a dead draw. But now, still some hard work to be done. Knights are so tricky as well.
Yeah, I mean you can reroute this knight to attack the h-pawn, and the bishop can attack the h-pawn, so black can potentially get both of his pieces attacking white's remaining pawn, and that could really tie down white. And the other thing is you can play this position on forever now, and before you never give your opponent a pawn for free in an ending, even if it is a draw. Just torturing yourself, and that's what he's doing here.
In the past, in last season of the tour, we talked about the Magnus effect. This feels like the Magnus effect. Any other opponent in the world, Artemiev would have just played that endgame. It was about to fizzle out to a draw. He wouldn't have cared. But then he just wanted to force it. He wanted to force the draw immediately, but he gave up a pawn in the process. So unnecessary. And Magnus knows it should still be a draw with best play. That's why Magnus's body language is still pretty relaxed. But if he smells blood, if he sees the game continue to move in black's favour, the momentum on his side, then Yeah, we could well be seeing another 50 moves of torture.
Well, we can see, that this white pawn is on a dark square, and Magnus is now starting to target it. It takes his knight 2 moves to target white's pawn as well, and I could certainly see white losing this one actually.
Yeah,
it's unpleasant.
And what about if the bishops gets traded off? Because Magnus now has the possibility of doing it. He hasn't done it.
I think, you can take the bishops off the board at any moment later in the game anyway, so there's no need to rush. The black knight is going towards this white corner pawn. And there we go. A big threat against white's remaining pawn. It's isolated, it's weak. If you defend it with the white knight now, the black king comes in. Oof, this one is hanging by a thread for Artemiev.
Yeah, he's made it so tricky here. I don't know if you take the bishop, you don't need to.
You can wait with it, right?
Yeah.
You can
bring the black king in.
Get your king into the game.
Yeah, definitely.
And suddenly it looks incredibly scary.
Yeah.
And Magnus has got 3 minutes to enjoy his position. Artemiev, seconds.
Yeah. Compare the kings. White's king is paralyzed, stuck, defending the pawn in front of it. Black's king has a free run. It's going to dislodge the white knight first, and then the black king is going to move over slowly towards the white king, going to try and trap it on the edge of the pawn.
2 seconds, 1 second. Wow.
Oh, with 1 second left on the clock. Oh.
Brinksmanship. Okay, and black's king could have attacked both pieces at the same time there, but white's king could have defended them. It's really, he's clinging on by his fingernails to this game now, Artemiev. And I'm still so shocked he gave up that pawn earlier. Still so much torture ahead now.
5 seconds,
Just wondering
3
what he missed there.
seconds.
I'm really wondering what Artemiev missed to play this position.
Maybe just a blooper or something.
Misevaluation, I think. He thought it would be a simple draw, just get rid of pawns, but no. Down to 3 seconds, 4 seconds again. Black's king is coming
in. And this is really uncomfortable now for white. He's getting pushed around all over the shop, and white's pieces in such bad squares. Maybe, is there a killer blow? I don't know, but it's uncomfortable.
It's close.
You're nearly in Zugzwang, meaning that white's going to run out moves potentially at some point in this position.
Now, maybe black needs to relocate the knight round now somewhere better so it can check away the white king. It's still not easy for Magnus to find the killer blow. Black's pieces are all on perfect squares, but white has set up a defensive fortress in a way. So, okay, he brings his bishop in. White's knight really lacking squares, actually. White's knight looks great, but it can't join the action again. It can't go towards where all the pawns lie. Black cutting off all the squares.
How many times have you seen Magnus win positions like this, though?
Too many.
I've seen him do it so many times where everyone thinks it's a draw, and all of a sudden he will just play, improve, wait for a weakness, wait for a blunder, win. And he loves winning these kind of ones.
Yeah.
I mean, you're even looking at a checkmate pattern in some structures. If you can
3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second.
Has he lost? Oh,
He did it with 2 seconds left.
Incredible.
like knight e2, get the bishop hitting h2, knight g1 checkmate is one very powerful idea. I mean, the white king, don't go for the h-pawn, go for checkmate here. Why not? Knight e2 looks incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. White's king lacking squares. Okay, the knight goes back, slightly surprising that one. As you mentioned, Simon, that was so tempting. At least threatened the idea of checkmate. And okay, instead, now White's knight has centralized, so maybe slightly better set up defensively.
He's kind of got still the same idea in the air. You know, the white king doesn't have too many squares, and Artemiev is just reduced to moving his knight to random squares.
Yep. And if he just checks the king with the black knight, it's checkmate now.
Yep.
So, okay, it takes a while to get there, but if you can do that whilst white can't improve his position, it's checkmate. So,
you know, just pick up the black knight and plant it on f2 or g1. Checkmate, right?
Checkmate.
Okay, but maybe this is a bad circuit, actually, for the white knight.
Yeah. Knight might get trapped by the black bishop. Black's bishop could just take a step back, maybe.
But I'm also thinking in terms of checks.
Okay.
It's not that easy for black
He's going for it.
to get
He's going
checked.
for checkmate.
Yeah.
The knight is just trying to get in a position where it checks the white king, and that is checkmate. So
Okay, so he has to move the bishop, right?
yeah,
White's bishop jumping out the way so the white knight can occupy the square it previously stood on with a check. You need to kick away the black king. The black king has completely boxed in its counterpart, its rival there.
still so calm, isn't he, Artemiev?
Yeah.
I mean,
man.
I just couldn't.
Oh, but okay, look, okay, we have checkmate in the air.
It's a threat. Knight g1.
to G1, yeah.
White has only 2 ways to stop that. Either you give a check to the black king, or you bring the white bishop back to cover any potential checking squares from the black knight.
2 seconds.
2 seconds. Only 2 possible moves to stop checkmate.
Oh, dear.
He gives a check himself.
Unbelievable.
I can't believe he looks so calm.
I know what I'd be doing here, and it wouldn't be looking like that. I mean, I'd be dripping sweat on the floor here.
And again, he's making the move with 3 seconds to spare.
He's defending incredibly well, considering the circumstances here. So
Yeah, fantastic defense, but still on the brink. Just that's the thing. 1 slip, and it's going to end in checkmate. White's king is trapped. So he has to keep doing this for many, many more moves. If I'm just going to check as well while the game continues, while the white knight hits the black bishop, I'm going to check how many moves he needs to survive to make the 50-move rule.
Okay.
But it's a long way to go.
Now there's an exchange of pieces, possibly. And,
but this is choice for Artemiev. Does he rock the boat and make the trade, or does he kind of maintain the same situation? And he's just chosen to maintain the same piece formation. So it's going to be knight and bishop against knight and bishop. And he steps back with his king. But
maybe missing an opportunity there.
Yeah.
Black needs to keep the knight alive to win the game, but in that type of position, it's a fine line, right, between a draw and a loss. Artemiev just didn't have enough time to calculate whether trading a knight for the black bishop was beneficial for him. So we continue. We're going to go round in a bit of a circle here. The last pawn move was on move 44. So they've made 24 moves.
Okay, halfway.
Yeah, 24 moves without a capture and without a pawn push. If it's 50 moves, so if there's no capture or pawn push before Black's 94th move, it's a draw.
Okay, 94.
94 is the magic number.
Yep, all right.
Yeah, David, I have a question for you about how emotionally draining is it to play always on the brink of time defeat?
It's exhilarating, Jovanka. You get full of adrenaline.
Is this why you do it? Because, I mean, David, you're quite famous for doing a similar thing to Artemiev here, like getting down to your last couple of seconds, playing a move, getting down to your last couple of seconds, playing a move. Do you do it for the rush, or do you do it because you just end up in that situation? You're maybe a bit of a perfectionist and you're trying to find the best moves for out.
Yeah, I think when I was younger, I did it for the rush, just because I enjoyed the situation. But the older I get, it's more stressful now. My nerves aren't the same as they used to be. Okay, we see a trade, so no more 50-move rule. But yeah, I was just going to say it's become more of a habit now, a bad habit that I need to kick. But time trouble, it's definitely a sin. Don't try it at home.
And you, Simon, I mean, when I'm in this kind of situation with seconds left on the clock, I feel incredibly stressed. Do you feel?
I can't handle it. I mean, I just, I've got enough bad habits as it is. I don't need any more. So, but I love the rush. I mean, I love blitz chess over the board, and I do, the adrenaline is incredible.
Yeah.
But I don't play very well when I'm short of time. I'm not particularly good at calculating quickly like David is.
Oh, hang on a second.
Okay, the bishops have come off, so Black needs his knight.
Hang a minute.
Okay.
Oh, no, is this a blunder?
I think White's in Zugzwang.
I think the white knight can't move.
It's that trick, Zugzwang.
Yeah,
so
Zugzwang.
no matter what White does now, his position will worsen. If the white king moves, the black king comes across and takes the white pawn. If the white knight moves, the white knight is getting trapped. Yeah. Oof, sneaky.
Incredible, incredible. I mean, I thought the pieces exchanged off, that's nearer to a draw. Next move, losing.
I was going to say the same.
And here you can't guard your H pawn in the long run, so I think another pawn is going to drop here, isn't it?
Yeah, you have to be a bit careful as Black. White's knight does threaten maybe to jump into the centre of the board with a check. That's why Black covers any potential checks. White's knight is completely frozen. White's knight has to stay on that square to defend its remaining pawn. If that white pawn drops off the board, Black has a 2-pawn advantage, and that is enough to win the game. Yeah. So it's all about whether Black can bring the black knight around to win that white pawn. It's still not easy.
I mean, so the plan is probably to move the king and then jump forward with a knight off for a trade, because the king and pawn ending, I'm assuming, is lost.
I think it depends where the kings are, but I think it's a draw if White gets the opposition there.
Yeah, OK.
So you have to be careful when you offer a trade of knights. So really, really tense position.
Yeah.
I think Black's king might have to come across anyway, and then the black knight will send... There we go.
This is the one. You have to stop White's knight jumping into that square, I guess, then move your knight around and then do a similar thing. I guess that's the plan, right?
Yep.
So it reminds me of an ending which I think Magnus may have had a long time ago, and I think Anish Giri had this against someone in the candidates. So, it's one of those ones which seemingly should be quite an easy draw because there's not much material on the board, but actually incredibly hard to play.
And with 1 second on the clock.
Again.
Of course. Yeah.
Wow.
I think you're right. He had this against the young Russian.
Yeah, that's right. Alexenko.
Alexenko.
That was a Nishikori in
Something
the
very
Cantonese.
similar, at least.
Yeah.
Okay, Black's knight is coming. It started its journey towards that white pawn. And down to 4 seconds, 3 seconds, 2. Okay, he made it with a few seconds left. And now the Black knight needs to find a route towards that pawn. The one problem with knights is they can't lose time. They're incapable of losing tempi. So you have to get a position where white is completely frozen, but you need to maneuver your knight round to the right square at the right time when your opponent's pieces are on the right squares. It's still tricky for Magnus to do this, to work out. Okay, now...
he's covered that square.
The white king will have to just wait.
The white knight, if it moves, the pawn drops, the white king has to just sidestep.
Yep.
Wow.
So he has to make his move.
No other move. You have to bring your king across. There we go. He plays it. And now Black's king. Oh, is this just genius by Magnus? Has he found the Zugzwang? Now the white knight's still stuck. If the white king moves away, the black king goes towards the white knight.
It's incredible to watch.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
running out of
incredible
moves.
to watch, just the understanding.
Yeah.
And you can see now White's king is being pushed further and further away. But he had to get his knight to the square.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, put this position in your memory banks, you know, especially the technique that he used, you know, just improving the placing of his knight to control the squares of the white king. I must admit, this is all fantastic technique to me.
I think he can win the pawn immediately by giving a check and then retreating the black knight to attack this white pawn. White's pawn is about to fall. It's going to be 2 pawns against none, and it still might take a while, but that is a winning endgame.
Yeah.
Okay, it's check. Oh, he played it with 1 second again.
Incredible.
And now the black knight can step back, attacking this white pawn. That pawn is falling. And it's important that the black knight, once it captures that white pawn, will defend its own pawns.
And if Magnus does win this game, then he only needs a draw in game 3 to be ready for the final. Vladislav Artemiev, he will have to win both of the 2 last rapid games to take it to tiebreaks.
Yeah. He's enjoying himself a bit too much here with that move, I feel.
Yeah.
And he's going for the more beautiful Zugzwang. And it's one thing that amazes me about chess, and I love about chess, is you can have brilliancies with all the pieces on the board, smashing attacks, which are really visually beautiful. But then you can have these kind of games where there's only a couple of pieces on the board and they're just as beautiful, but completely different. So there's so much beauty in chess in so many different ways. And now he's 2 pawns up. He can just slowly roll those pawns down the board, which he's going to do now.
And he's going to do it with the assistance of the whole team, because the one danger there is for black is that the white knight can swap itself off for 2 pawns. And if that's the case, then it's going to be a draw. But of course, black can easily stop this.
Yeah, you have to keep 1 pawn alive. You can't let the white knight get both of them. Yeah. And there we go, the white king planting itself in front of the black pawns. You just have to do this step by step. For Magnus, I would get my king out of the way soon over the next few moves. I don't really want the black king in the way of the pawns, ideally. But Magnus has a lot of time on the clock. Nearly 3 minutes. No 50-move rule, we should mention in this one, because that will reset every time black pushes a pawn. And he does that immediately. Okay, so I guess it's okay it's fine here having the king in front of black's pawns, because white's knight and king, again, they will be stuck at some point. They will have to give way. And yeah, it's just a matter of time, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's done. You never relax, though. This is a big mistake that I've made, because chess is such a stressful game. I mean, I think Kaya said it's like doing an exam. You know, like an exam, you get very stressed out, and it's really hard work on the mind. Yeah. And as soon as you drop your guard, it's bang. You throw away all that hard work. So only relax when the game's over, and it's so easy to think, oh, I've won this now, and then just go into autopilot. Biggest mistake you can make, that is go into autopilot mode. You need to have that endurance to finish things off.
Yeah, I saw some stats actually that most car accidents happen within 2 miles of reaching your destination, and it's the same with chess. Most blunders happen just when you're on the brink of winning or just on the brink of making a draw. So it's just that phenomenon of relaxing too early.
Wow, that's interesting.
Okay, meanwhile, white's just waiting, nothing else to do with the king. Black has relocated his knight. He's ready, is it now or over the next few moves, to push a pawn? And Magnus just calculating the risk. He just wants to make sure that there are no stalemates, for example, or any knight sacrifices by white, or any annoying checks.
All right, so game 3 between Jan Nepomniachtchi and Andrei Esipenko, that has started. Nepomniachtchi won game 2 and is up by 1 point. If he wins game 3 going on right now, he will be ready for the finals. Esipenko needs at least a draw. and he also needs to win either this game or game 4 to take it to tie breaks. We will jump straight into that game as soon as this is finished. Can it still last for some time, this one?
Still might go for a while.
Yeah.
I think we will hit the move 100 mark that I get so excited about. Yeah, I mean, Artemiev, he's doing the right thing. He's not resigning. We saw in his body language a few moves ago that he'd pretty much given up. He knows he's losing objectively. But as we see by Magnus thinking now, it's not easy. There are still some tricks left. And this is what I recommend everyone at home. Never resign, especially in endgames like this. There's always resources or always tricks that you can set for your opponent to save the game. The number of times when I was young, or especially even now when I play online in Blitz, you pre-move or something and stalemate, and the game is over.
And our stats boss, Askild, just messaged me saying that this is good for Magnus's fighting chess statistics, that we do know he wants to have a high score on the fighting chess index. And 100 moves, that's going to be good for the index.
Yeah, exactly. Especially if he ends up winning decisive game.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you must have a massive fighting index with your 200, 300 move games or whatever you love doing on a regular basis. It's like...
I remember Dave Smurden released stats for, I think it was the top 100 players in the world, and I wasn't that high. I was a bit surprised. I was a bit annoyed about that. But
so you're not a fighting player, then?
I mean, maybe he put the wrong games in. Maybe there's another Grandmaster called Hal. Maybe he chose that guy.
Well, again, I remember one story where you're playing at the British Championships and you're playing Gary Lane in the last round, and David only needs to draw to win the British Championships outright, and that is a big title. It's something I'd love to have myself, and I know Jovanka's won the British Ladies Championships many times, but Gary offered David a draw quite quickly, and everyone thought, of course, you take the draw, you become British champion, you hit the bar hard, and David was like, no. and just beat him instead. It was like,
nice, David.
Did you beat him?
It was a draw eventually.
Okay, but you still
I could have
said
saved
no.
myself a few hours if I did. I still said no.
But you said no, and we're like, you said no. You could become British champion now, and you decided to play on. I was like, wow, this is incredible. So
I was young. I was full of optimism. Meanwhile, there have been some moves. We should mention Black is actually giving up his knight. Magnus is letting White take the Black knight, but that would distract the White king, and the Black pawns are just going to run through and promote. And we see in the evaluation bar, it's completely winning for Black now. Magnus just needs to choose the right square for his king. I'm not sure whether it matters. I mean, I would go in front of my pawn here, to be honest. But yeah, I think this one is winning. The Black pawns are just too close to the promotion squares now.
Yep.
Yeah, I would definitely go in front of my pawn. It looks good. And let Harry take the glory.
Harry will become a queen, Queen Harriet.
Oh.
Harriet.
And actually, this is instructive because knights struggle most against those flank pawns. Knights struggle against Harry and Alice the most. So promote Harry here. That's the key.
Harry, not Alice.
Harry and Harry.
Well, will we see Harriet the Queen, or will Artemiev give up before that, do you think?
Probably give up.
He'll give up before then.
So.
I think when it becomes apparent that he can't maintain, well, you know, Artemiev is trying, but you can't take the pawn. That's the problem. The knight takes pawn, you just give a check with your knight. And
King h4. I mean, you still have to calculate that.
Magnus doing it the hard way. He's still working things out, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would be like, okay, this looks like still, you've only got one pawn now, and it's like, right, you have to be very careful about your calculation here. I mean, I'm surprised by this, actually.
I think Magnus is going for something that he's studied before. I've seen this endgame with a king and a pawn on this square, and White's knight completely stuck, stopping the Black pawn. And all you need to do as Black is relocate your knight, distract the White knight, and then your pawn promotes to a queen. So I think Magnus had it worked out pretty much, or has seen something very similar to this before, seen this pattern.
Yeah, it's incredible how he just finishes the game off. You know, even here, it's like, wow, he knows this is a win, and he's got it. He's got Zugzwang.
Zugzwang. No matter what White does, you will lose the White knight. Yeah. It's game over, and Artemiev, I think, has just resigned.
So impressive. He's so impressive in these...